Well, friends, welcome to this webinar. This is being hosted by the Weather Risk Management Services Private Limited. And I'm here with you for the next 1 hour. We will be, of course, discussing or understanding what is going on with agriculture and what kind of appropriate solutions are required at this particular juncture, because as you all know, Indian agriculture is passing through a terrible crisis. There is a lot of expectation from a good monsoon this year. So let's see whether we can be really ameliorating or mitigating the distress that prevails in this country. So I'm here before you and would be very keenly looking forward to your questions. While people are still joining, I think let me present before you a little bit of overview as to how the Indian agriculture is faring. You're all aware that after we have at least 2 years of record production in India in the last 2 years. This third year, I say third year is because the agriculture year starts, as you know, from July. And we expect a good monsoon rain this time, and this should, of course, change the complexion. But will the distress get mitigated or not? What are the steps we need to take? We need to expand or bring in new marketing avenues for farmers, or their need for technical innovation, or whether farmers need more minimum support price and income in their hand, or everything put together is what is required in agriculture. These are all the issues that are grappling the policymakers or the farmers, or the policymakers as well as the farmers are grappling with at this particular juncture in India's history. And I'm hopeful that we will be able to emerge out of this crisis sooner than later. And no country can afford to ignore its farming population, especially when it is roughly about 52% of the country's total population. This, I think, is one of the very serious challenges that the country faces. And I am very hopeful that the focus at this particular juncture is what is or what will derive or what will force the governments and the policymakers to start considering that agriculture cannot be ignored for long. And this, I think, is a very positive avenue open to us. And let's look into that. Couple of things which I think are very important is the issue that for the last 2 years at least we have been watching is farmers dumping their produce on the streets, on the highways, whether it is tomato, potato, onions, vegetables, and also pulses, mustard, soybean, cotton. The prices have remained depressed for the past 2 years, and that is what has actually added to the farmers' anger. And this anger is quite visible in the sense that for the last 2 years at least, we have a number of protests across the country. In fact, if I go by the averages that the government, one of the government agencies had been compiling, roughly about 16, 17 protests are happening every day across the country, somewhere in the country. And that should tell us that the anger is spilling on the streets, and the governments have a tough task on their hand to see that agriculture is pulled out of the distress that it is presently in. Not an easy task, but also not a difficult task. And let us look at the various options that are available. But in the last few years, last 2 years at least, we have seen that the public protests have been basically centered around two issues. One is farmers have been seeking a higher minimum support price, which means they need more income in their hands. And they have been specifically demanding that the Swaminathan committee report. Swaminathan, as you know, M.S. Swaminathan is a very distinguished scientist who was heading the National Farmers Commission. In his report, he has recommended that what the farmers need to be given is C2 cost plus 50% profit. C2 cost is a comprehensive cost, and this is done, the evaluation is done by the Commission for Agriculture Cost and Prices, and they are the ones who would work out the comprehensive cost, and on that basis of the comprehensive cost, Swaminathan had suggested that the 50% profit should be added. We have seen the government recently announcing that they have done it. Now, whether they have done it or not, I think is a question of debate, and I'm sure many of you would have questions on that also. We'll definitely look into it. At the same time, I find the other important demand of the farmers has been that the entire outstanding loan that the farmers carry should be waived off, which of course various estimates would show that the total loan of course is too big, roughly about 13 lakh crores that the farmers presently are living with. And the state governments, as we have seen, those who go to the elections have been promising farmers that they will waive off the outstanding loans. But eventually what they have ended up waiving off is only a small percentage of the total volume. And that has, of course, irked farmers, and they think this is not the right way to provide or to bail out farming community. So these two demands is what is keeping the nation engrossed, and I think there would be many ways to look into it, or also try to see how to address this particular question, or the demands that the farmers have been asking for. Are they justified, and where would the money come from is a question that has been often asked. And also the government on its own has spelled out a number of steps they have taken to improve farming conditions, which include bringing soil health card, bringing neem coated urea for application, and also bringing micro irrigations at certain places. Then, of course, expanding the network of electronic national agriculture market in the country, and so on and so forth. So let us see whether these solutions that the government is coming out with are able to address this crisis, or we have something else to do, or maybe in addition, or maybe besides this. So we'll have to see what exactly is required to be done at this particular junction. Ladies and gentlemen, I think it is time for you to shoot your questions, and then I can at least start looking at the specifics that you may be interested in. I know it's a Sunday afternoon, and many people would find it difficult to wake up from their siesta, or they're having a relaxed time. But we are discussing a very important issue, and it may determine the future of this country's economic progress also. And I think it is very important to therefore understand and participate. So I am waiting for your first question, and then let's shoot. Agriculture is, even if we see now the sowings, as you know, the rains have picked up, and the sowings are now in progress. But till July or till June end, we have seen that the progress in sowing was roughly giving us a shortfall of about 30 to 40% in various crops, especially cotton and some of the most important crops, and at the same time, even including coarse cereals. And but the as far as paddy is concerned, we are nearing the kind of target that we have set for ourselves, and I'm hopeful by the time July progresses, or the rains progress in July, if they do it in a normal manner, and also in the first week of August, we still have time, although this will be delayed sowings, and delayed sowing does lead to loss in production. But that, in any case, is also something we need to live with it, because after all, rains are not in the hands of farmers. And I am very hopeful that we will achieve the sowing targets, even if it is delayed. And this would mean that we can expect a good harvest this year also. It would depend upon rains, whether the rains get a pause somewhere in August or September, as is being feared. And that's also a very crucial time for crop production. And if this happens, definitely we'll get a real setback some setback in agriculture production this year. But the bigger issue remains that good or bad monsoons, whether they are good or bad, the farm incomes have not increased in the country. In fact, farm incomes have remained almost static for the last 2 decades, as a recent OECD ICRIER study has shown. And we have been, of course, talking about it, that the farm incomes have remained static for several decades now, not only 2 decades. And what has been the reason is because we have ensured, or we have deliberately kept the procurement prices or the farm prices low, because the focus has been, or the economist's thrust has been, to ensure that food inflation does not take place. To maintain food inflation, to ensure that the consumers get food at the right prices or at low prices, the farmers have been paid less all these years. And this is what has complicated and also compounded the crisis that farmers have been facing all these years. Just to give you statistics, between 2011-12 and 2015-16, 5 years, the Niti Aayog, the country's top think tank, official think tank, has itself concluded or come to a conclusion that the farm incomes have risen every year by less than 0.5%, 0.44% to be exact. In these 5 years, there were years of normal monsoon, there were years of bad monsoon, and that tells you clearly whether good or bad farm incomes, good or bad monsoon, farm incomes have remained low. And this is what has added on to indebtedness as far as agriculture is concerned, because if the farmer is not getting income, he has to bank upon credit to get back into cultivation or farming. And that means more of mounting or more debt that he has to carry. And that is why the farmers' demand for waiving off the outstanding debt that they carry is justified, because another study, part of the study of the OECD ICRIER, shows that consumers in India have paid 25% less than the international prices or market prices. And that really tells us how low the procurement prices or market prices have been in this country to primarily benefit the consumers. And as you all know, why the governments are worried at this farm inflation issue is because a couple of our governments, state governments, were pulled down when the onion prices went up beyond a point in India, and nobody wants that repeat to happen. So therefore, the entire focus or thrust is to see that farm or food inflation remains low. And I think this depends on the macroeconomic policies also, because the macroeconomic policies that India undertook in August 2016 is very clear. They have said that we have to keep food inflation low for the next 5 years, so as to see that the economic growth takes place. Now, that is what I've been saying for long, that agriculture is being sacrificed for the sake of economic reforms. And unless we set this basic structure, in a correct manner or in a correct place or in a correct approach, I don't think we will be able to get out of this agrarian crisis that exists today in this country. Is there any other way of providing farmers with more income? There's the one, of course, is the minimum support price. Minimum support price, as you know, is the price farmers get when they bring their produce to the markets at the time of the harvest. And according to the norms, the private trade would first step in to buy the produce at a higher price that if they can buy or if they want to buy. And whatever is left, which is not being bought at this price that is announced by the government, then the government steps in to make purchases and buy the entire stock. This has happened for wheat and rice in this country for several decades now, and very well, I must say. But beyond these two crops, and if you also include cotton and sugarcane to some extent, because where they, of course, it is the industry or coupled with the government which undertakes this procurement operations. But otherwise, for the remaining or the part of these 23 crops that the government announces the minimum support price every year, it becomes relatively meaningless, because as long as we don't procure what is being promised or being announced, the price being announced, I think it doesn't make much difference for the farmers. The other point is that the total MSP, if we see, as far as wheat and rice is concerned, 30% is what is procured by the state of the total production, which means roughly 30% farmers are the beneficiaries of the procurement price system that we have. Considering that the land holdings are very small, that is the assessment that we have. 30% farmers benefit from MSP as far as these two crops are concerned, wheat and rice. But if I were to include all crops and all farmers, then according to the Shanta Kumar Committee report, which is quite clear, it says that only 6% farmers in India get the benefit of minimum support price. The reasons are twofold. One, of course, the farmers don't know what is MSP. The reason being that the MSP system has not been expanded throughout the country, or does not exist throughout the country. The total markets or mandis or organized or the regulated mandis we call under the APMC mandis, the number would be somewhere around 7,500 or 600. These are the existing regulated markets India has, called as APMC mandis. And what actually India requires is, if we were to provide a mandi within 5-kilometer radius, what India requires is about 42,000 mandis. That clearly shows that the thrust or the focus of the government policy, food management policies, was confined to the Green Revolution areas, primarily Punjab, Haryana, some parts of Andhra Pradesh, Telangana, Karnataka. Now a little bit of more procurements, mandis or procurement, regulated mandis have been added, especially in Madhya Pradesh, Chhattisgarh, some in Odisha, also in Uttar Pradesh. But yet a lot has to be done as far as expanding the regulated mandi network is concerned. So that is a very, very big policy initiative that the government has to undergo or undertake. And but the government seems to be moving towards setting up what is called as electronic national agriculture markets, where it is a good step that the middleman, at least is the middleman's role as far as cartelization is concerned is restricted or limited now, because it is open to any farmer to register himself or to make purchases. That is a very very well done step, and I think, but that does not address the entire problem that the farmers faces, because ENAM, if you have been or if you have seen electronic markets, electronic national agriculture markets, they operate on what is called as model price. The model price is the average of the trading that takes place during a day, and that becomes the average becomes the model price, and that the government then ensures, or the markets then ensure, that everything is purchased above the model price. But the model price, because it's the average during the day, it can be much lower than the minimum support price. Let's say if the model price for tomato is 1 rupee per kilo, I don't think it's a model price, it is a distress price then. And there is no mechanism that model price becomes an assured price. When I say assured price, means at least to the level of minimum support price. If the tomato grower has to get 1 rupee or 2 rupee as a model price, and the system rejoices that farmers are getting a model price, I think there's a big lacuna here. And unless that is addressed, ENAM would not make any significant change as far as the farmer's fortune is concerned. Will it happen? I don't see any anything moving in that direction, because the trade obviously would like to keep the farmers' prices as low as possible, and industry too would like to pay. Agribusiness industry too would be very happy if the prices remain low. So put together, they will ensure that the prices are not increased. But it also shows that just for 6%. So here is a question, and Sanjay Kumar says, how can we bridge the gap between a small farmer and large markets? Well, let me answer that. See, we need to understand that when we talk of small farmers, as you know, in India would be less than 2 hectares. Now, majority of the small farmers who have less than 2 hectares do not have much of a marketable surplus, and they remain outside the purview of the large markets. What is important is, unless these farmers are in cultivating crops like vegetables, which they're short duration and which they aim to address or provide for a particular market close to the big cities, then it is okay, then it is all right. But otherwise, if they are cultivating food grain crops for themselves, because 2 hectares, as you will agree, is a smaller land holding size, but in India, roughly about 83% farmers are small farmers, having less than 2 hectares of land holdings. That's the question being asked, that if the farmers were to get a higher MSP, although the government's A2 plus FL formula is being rejected by farmer unions, which of course is lower than C2 cost, then even then it doesn't reach out to those small farmers, because small farmers do not have that marketable surplus. So what we need is a kind of a different kind of a mechanism to provide income, more income into the hands of small farmers. Because after all, if the small farmers, and as I said earlier, 83% of, roughly 83% of our farmers are small farmers. If they were to stop cultivating food, India would have to rely on food imports to feed the country. And if you have to rely on food imports, you can just imagine how much of the foreign exchange India will have to shell out every year to provide food to its needy. So therefore, I think it's very important to keep the small farmers in business, or ensure that they go on cultivating crops. But the fact that the incomes have remained low is also because the MSP, they do not get the benefit of minimum support price. Let me give you an illustration here, that 70% farmers in an NSO study have already said that they don't even know what is MSP. Now, if they don't even know MSP, they of course have been selling something in their local markets or local hearts, which of course has to be now linked to the bigger markets. I think the best way would be to form cooperatives, and if they can form collective make a collective effort. I think that's the way forward for them to take advantage of the large markets. Is it possible? Yes. At some places it is being tried, and it has been seen that when the farmers join hand, they have a better not only negotiating skills but also marketing skills, and that would help them to get out of this trap where they are just ignored by the large markets. Some areas of India, I have seen these kinds of initiatives happening, where small farmers are finding a kind of a consignment, multiple or a collective consignment. In fact, Small Farmers Consortium is also helping them at many places to come together. Various places, self-help groups have been formed. They are also trying to take advantage of their collective power, or collective basically negotiating power, and that is the only way small farmers can perhaps reach out to the large markets. That's one way when you only look at the markets as a solution. The other solution, of course, is we move away from price policy to income policy, because as we all know, income policy is something that the entire world is now talking about. In fact, if you look at globally, most of the countries, rich and developed countries, provide farmers with direct income support and so on. And if you look into the kind of support agriculture has been provided in America and European Union, that of course we can't even imagine in India, but it is what has sustained the farming communities in those countries. It is not whether they are small or big, but the kind of direct income support and the kind of subsidies that have been pumped in agriculture in those countries has made those agriculture economically viable. A recent OECD study, sorry, not OECD, but UNTAD India study, was clearly showed that if these subsidies, which are called as green box subsidies in WTO parlance, are withdrawn, let's say in America, then American agriculture literally collapses. There will be a downfall by about 40% in their production, which means there has to be a way forward. Another question is, how can we connect small farmers to large markets, and is there any way that we can provide a good income to farmers? Very good question. Let me answer that. Well, yes, as I said, the small farmers have an opportunity that they can come together and market, their produce collectively. That's one way. The other way, as I was spelling out or suggesting, was that we have to move from the system of price policy, or we have been adopting all these years. We have been following the policy of price policy, and I think it is time to move away to income policy, because just to understand, there are two reasons for it, very significant. One, as I said earlier, was that 83% of the farmers are being small farmers, more or less remain outside the ambit of the marketing structures that we have, or marketing systems we have. And secondly, the World Trade Organization also makes it very difficult now to go on increasing prices for agriculture commodities. You know that under the WTO, India is already uh, getting a benefit of peace clause, and peace clause means we have been given a kind of an exercise, or we have given a kind of an option that as long as we are under the bracket of peace clause, no country can take us to dispute panel or challenge us. But the legal question is that the WTO is putting a lot of pressure on India to ensure that we do not increase any further the procurement prices, and at the same time we do not even expand the number of crops in which these crop prices are being given. So therefore, there's a limitation. We will always face this hurdle. Every year, we will see that there will be more and more pressure on India. And also, autonomously, I find the Indian government and Indian policymakers are very keen to disband the procurement system, and they have been saying it very loudly, putting pressure on the state governments. APMC amendment law that they are trying to bring in is also linked to withdrawal of MSP for wheat and rice, of course, mainly. And that is happening. Punjab Chief Minister has a number of times said that he has been under pressure to disband the minimum support price. The argument has been that as long as MSP remains, farmers would not be able to get the benefit of the markets, and markets would be providing them with a higher price, which completely is wrong. Because if you look at India, if you look at India, as I said earlier, 6% farmers get the benefit of minimum support price. 94% farmers are already dependent on markets. And if the markets were so benevolent, I'm sure the demand of the farmers would not have been to provide MSP plus 50% every year. So I think there is some mismatch here. And this argument that markets are very, very benevolent, I think is completely flawed, because nowhere in the world has market been benefiting farmers, even in America and Europe. If the markets were so benevolent, I see no reason why the OECD countries, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, countries which form this group, should be providing about $420 billion of subsidies every year. And this is happening because the markets were completely inefficient. So the markets, to expect markets to provide right kind of food or rightful prices to the farmers, I think is a foregone case. What exactly we require is to ensure, as I said earlier, to move away from price policy to income policy. There has to be a kind of a mechanism by which we can provide a stable income to farmers every month or every year. And this is what I call as an assured income. There has to be a guaranteed income to farmers, that after all they produce economic wealth for the country, and then they need to be adequately compensated for producing that economic wealth. Farming is the only sector where they do not get the rightful price, despite the kind of benefit they bring to the farmers. They want the benefit economic benefit that the farmers bring to the country. So I think it should be very clear that we perhaps would have, in a limited period ahead, we would have no choice but to move from price policy to income policy, given the kind of international pressure and the understanding of mainland economists within the country. This can still be challenged, yes, if we have a system where we are able to lay out the markets, or as I said, regulated mandis at every 5-kilometer radius. Ensure that we have a network, as I said, of 42,000 mandis in this country, and then make procurement. But the problem would come up, what will you do with this procurement that you do? So I think we need to really They have a kind of economic policies where the procurement is linked to agri processing also, and that is how it can progress. If we are linking to food management, and I see there is a lot of option scope for more procurement, because after all, we still have the largest population of hungry in the world in India, and we need more pulses, we need more coarse cereals, we need more milk and vegetables for them, and there has to be some mechanism drawn where we ensure food security in a manner that, like in Brazil, Brazil is one big country which has been able to uh, move from a stage of quite an appalling hunger to zero hunger. And I think that is a remarkable initiative or the step they have taken. We have to learn from it. In fact, they learned from us, first of all, how to do it. And they followed the Indian pattern. They actually ensured that every 20 kilometer radius, they provided a regulated mandi. Farmers could come and sell anything, and the government was obliged to purchase it. And that is what is called local production. This formula, the bigger picture, is local production, local procurement, and local distribution. This is a model that has clicked there also, and they have reached a level of zero hunger. I think in India also, the time has come when we should link up our food security, agriculture, food security, nutritional security, and agriculture processing and marketing, all these programs in a manner that it is aimed at or targets how or when we would be able to achieve zero hunger. Now, zero hunger in India is possible only if we provide more support for agriculture, and also more income into the hands of farmers, because that is what will revitalize the rural economy. More money into the hands of farmers means more generation of economic growth or economic development in the rural areas, and that will trigger a domino effect in this country. Simple reason that more purchasing hands in the power of 52% of the in the hands of 52% of the country's population will trigger a kind of a economic growth, which would, or trigger a kind of demand, which is very crucial for industrial growth. So the fast-moving in consumer goods market as well as the industrial market would expand. And I have always been saying that if the Seventh Pay Commission, which addresses only provides a higher income in the hands of 1% of the population, and the industry thinks it's going to be a booster dose for the economy because it will generate demand. Imagine what kind of demand would be generated in this country when 52% of the population will get enhanced income in their hands. That should be the economic thinking in this country. And how to do it is a need of it coming up with a holistic design that needs to be followed in this country. And if I'm sure you'll agree, if 52% population has more money in their hands, I presume the demand they would generate would be so high that we would be in double digit as far as GDP growth is concerned. From soon thereafter, when we provide more income into the hands of the farmers. So therefore, the challenge is how to see that more income passes into the hands of farmers. But this cannot happen if we go on tinkering with the formula of even minimum support price. By, as I said very often, that I saw a film some years back, or many years back, which the title of the film was "Don't Raise the Bridge, Lower the River." Now, instead of raising the minimum price, support price, if you lower the formula, or if you tinker with the formula, which actually would send a wrong signal to the farming community, but also perhaps may be able to give a political, answer, as if justifying that the incomes have been raised, but in reality, the incomes have not been raised. When we go by the prescription that the government has now doled out, a formula called as A2 plus FL, it does not increase the real income into the hands of farmer the way it should have been done. We cannot have two formulas, one for the farming community and one for the industry. So either you follow the same formulas for both industries. If industries are willing to go by the A2 plus FL formula that the farmers have, or the farmers have been told that this is good for them, then I think let's do it for the industry also, and you will see what happens. The industry will react very violently in that particular case. Yes, we have questions. On which basis government decides MSP? Is that helpful for farmers? Let me answer that. There was a good question talking about MSP and whether it is, uh, you know, good enough for farmers or not, especially smaller marginal farmers. Now, I take you back to a economic survey report of 2016. And the survey is very clearly telling us that the average income of a farming family in 17 states of India, which means half the country, literally half the country, is only rupees 20,000 a year. 20,000 a year means roughly about 1,670 rupees a month. Now, I can't even imagine, how a farming family, which means 5 people in a family, can live in or survive in 1,700 rupees a month. And you can't even, if you're in Punjab or Haryana or elsewhere also, you can't rear a cow in 1,700 rupees a month. So it clearly tells us how low farm incomes had been all these years, and it is time to really provide farmers with an economic or what we call as living income. After all, farmers are citizens of India, and they are doing yeoman service for the country's welfare and economic growth, and they need to be compensated for the work they are put in. But the middle class and the elite of this country, or the, let's say, the consumers, the consumers in the urban areas, have simply not cared about farmers, and I find nobody standing up for the case or for the sake of farmers in this country as far as urban areas concerned. Except, at some places it happens, and if you remember the long march that took place in Maharashtra, when people walked 7 days, thousands of people walked for 7 days to reach Mumbai. That was a time when, yes, doctors and civil society people, the Dibbawalas and so on, jumped in or started helping the farmers who had walked for about 7 days. But if you take out these kind of incidents, generally the middle class remains untouched by the agrarian distress. And in fact, sometimes I feel disenchanted because when I tweet saying that today 3 farmers have died in Punjab or 2 farmers have died in Punjab, I get a troll which says, why do you have to even worry about them? They should in any case be dead. Now, that's the kind of feeling in the urban middle class. I feel very sad that people perhaps think that this agrarian distress that we are seeing, which of course is reflected by the huge number of suicides that take place in this country, roughly about 40 minutes. Every 40 minutes, one farmer commits suicide. The people living in city are just oblivious. They think it is happening somewhere in Somalia or in Ethiopia, and they don't have to worry about it. But let's not forget that this is happening right into your own backyard, and sooner or later, it's going to engulf the entire country if this distress is allowed to prevail. So I think the challenge or as a social responsibility that the society has to demonstrate so far has not been seen. I am not hopeful, whether this can change overnight. This thinking can change overnight, but there is definitely a big need to ensure or convince people that their future also is safe as long as the farmers of this country remain safe. And is it possible? Yes, it is possible, and I think there are many ways by which people living in the cities can stand up and raise their voice and also contribute or join in providing a better future for the farmers. And one simple way is that I find is when I go to the families in my neighborhood or everywhere, I find every family or every second family has a family doctor. Now, if you can have a family doctor, just think, why can't you have a family farmer? And if you have a family farmer, perhaps the need after a few months or years would be you would not need a family doctor. And it is possible if people living in cities do understand the importance of food that they consume. And this is today, as we all know, a broken food system, which is very clearly telling us that even the producer as well as the consumers both are at the receiving end, the kind of food that we produce. And also it is very important to see that food has become the most problematic area today. The way it is produced and consumed has become the biggest problematic area the world is witnessing. Roughly about 57% of greenhouse gases comes from food and agriculture, and this would start from deforestation up to the food waste. It results in 57% of greenhouse gas emission. It also shows that much of the world's environment is going topsy-turvy because of the. If somebody wants to ask a question, Aditya Kumar Dwivedi, please. You just said, sir. This is, of course, something that is now being internationally discussed and debated, and we have something called as ecosystem services approach being followed now at various places, or being considered now at various places, where you try to work out the economic price, the real economic price of producing food. So far, it's only the fertilizer, the pesticides, the machinery that goes into it, plus the farm labor, which is calculated, the price of seed, etc., which forms the food price. But eventually, what we are not discussing today, or what we are not calculating, is what happens to the soil, what happens to the groundwater, what happens to the environmental protection, and so on and so forth, environmental damage that has been done. So I think given that scenario, we must understand that food and agriculture is the biggest challenge, and the broken food system has to be, addressed and attached as quickly as possible. One last question which is coming up from Ajit Kumar Dwivedi is there any way in which we are providing good income to farmers, especially for small farmers? Well, my dear friends, let me answer that to you before you go. The only way. I think that should be all for today. We had a quite an extensive discussion on the food crisis and the problem that agriculture faces, and I'm sure in the days to come we will continue with this dialogue more and more, so that people become aware and try to realize that the urgency that the country today faces is primarily how to address the agrarian distress, how to walk extra mile with the farmers to see that they are a happy dog. Thank you very much. See you again.